I am Naomi, born July 14th, 1989, in Kingston, Jamaica, and I confess this with trembling authority because I was trained as a witch and I carried out spiritual assignments against believers. I am not repeating rumors or superstition. I am exposing what I personally did, what I saw, and what I now deeply regret. Your dog does not bark at empty corners by accident. And tonight, I am tearing the veil of a truth many pastors never dare to name. Like this video, comment, and share it now. This is not optional, because someone connected to you is under spiritual surveillance. You will watch this until the very end, because what is revealed here will change how you see your home, your nights, and your authority forever. This is forbidden knowledge. And if you are still here, it means a prophetic awakening has already begun inside you. I need you to understand this clearly, because ignorance is what the kingdom of darkness feeds on. When I was deep in witchcraft, we never targeted unbelievers first. We targeted homes that prayed, homes that worshipped, homes that carried light. Animals were not random in our operations. Dogs were especially important. Not because they were weak, but because they were sensitive. I was taught early that animals perceive spiritual shifts before humans do. They sense changes in atmosphere. They react to unseen movement. They respond to spiritual intrusion. When your dog barks at an empty corner every night, it is not confused, it is not bored, it is not imagining things. It is reacting to presence. In witchcraft, we were trained to observe animals before we attempted entry into a home. If a dog barked aggressively at a specific location repeatedly, we marked that house differently because something was already happening there. Corners matter in the spirit. You were never taught this in church, but I was taught this in covens. Corners are points of gathering. They are boundaries. They are places where spiritual residue collects. We used corners to anchor assignments. Not because corners are evil by nature, but because they are structurally quiet places in homes where humans really pray. Think about it. You anoint doors. You anoint windows. You pray over beds. But you ignore corners. That is not accidental. That gap is exploited. When an assignment was sent toward a believer's home, we didn't always enter physically. We projected, we observed, we tested resistance. Animals reacted first. I remember standing outside a house during an assignment in silence. No chanting, no movement, just observation. The dog inside began barking at the same corner near the living room wall. Over and over, aggressively, low growls, hackles raised. That was confirmation to us that spiritual contact had been made, not possession, not dominance. Contact. Your dog does not see like you see. It senses vibration. It hears frequencies you cannot. It feels atmospheric pressure in the spirit. When an unclean presence lingers, dogs respond defensively. They bark to warn. They bark to challenge. They bark because something crossed the line. We relied on that reaction. If a dog remained calm, we knew the house was either spiritually dormant or heavily fortified. If the dog reacted violently to empty space, we knew there was resistance forming. Here is what terrifies many believers when I say this. Dogs barking can mean two things. Either something is trying to enter, or something is being prevented from entering. That distinction matters. Not every bark means defeat. Sometimes it means protection is activating. But when the barking happens every night, at the same time, at the same corner, you are witnessing a repeated attempt. Patterns are how the spirit realm operates. Witchcraft thrives on repetition. So does prayer. I need you to hear this without fear, but with clarity. Some of you unknowingly live in spiritually contested spaces, not because you invited darkness, but because your light attracts attention. We use dogs as indicators. because they do not lie. They do not spiritually rationalize. They react. If your dog stares into a corner, barks, then retreats and whimpers, that is not curiosity. That is intimidation being resisted. If your dog barks and positions itself between you and that space, that is guardianship activating. In assignments, when we saw that behavior, we adjusted strategy. We waited. We delayed. We attempted entry later through dreams, fatigue, or emotional opening. This is why some of you experience unexplained heaviness at night, why your sleep is disrupted, why prayer feels harder after midnight. Your dog is reacting to what you are still being trained to discern. I regret this deeply now, because I know how calculated it was. We counted on believers dismissing signs, calling it imagination, calling it just a dog. But the spirit world does not respect your denial. It respects authority. Here is the truth that changes everything. A barking dog does not mean the enemy has power. It means the enemy has been noticed. Darkness hates being exposed. It hates being confronted. It hates light. When your dog reacts, heaven is not panicking. Hell is assessing. You are not helpless. You were never meant to be passive. I am speaking with urgency because many of you ignore the first warning signs until escalation happens. Nightmares, oppression, unusual fear, sudden conflict in the home. Those are not random either. The reason I am exposing this now is because believers are waking up, and the tactics that once worked quietly are being exposed loudly. Your dog barking is not the problem. Silence would be. This is where your authority matters. This is where your voice matters. This is where ignorance must die. I need you alert, not afraid. Because once you understand what is happening, the balance of power shifts immediately. And in the next point, I will expose exactly why nighttime is chosen, why corners are targeted, and what witches fear most when a believer finally responds instead of ignoring the signs. You need to understand why this happens at night. Because darkness is not chosen for mystery, it is chosen for strategy. In witchcraft, nighttime was never symbolic, it was operational. It reduces human resistance. Your body is tired. Your mind is quiet. Your discernment is lowered. Your vigilance is relaxed. That is not an accident. That is why assignments are released after midnight. I was trained that between midnight and 3 a.m., the human spirit is most vulnerable to intrusion if it is unguarded. Not because God sleeps, but because people do. This is why your dog reacts when you are least alert. It is compensating for what you are not consciously guarding. Corners are targeted at night because they function like spiritual shadows, not physical shadows, spiritual ones. During the day, your home is filled with noise, movement, and authority. At night, the atmosphere settles. Sound carries differently. Presence concentrates. Corners collect atmosphere the way basements collect moisture. In rituals, we were taught that repeated attention to the same location creates familiarity in the spirit realm. Familiarity opens access. Access invites influence. That is why the same corner. That is why the same hour. That is why the same reaction from your dog. Patterns are never accidental. Let me expose something most believers do not know. Dark spirits do not roam randomly. They move with permission and opportunity. They test boundaries before they attempt anything deeper. Your dog barking is often the result of a boundary test failing. When a spirit approaches a home, it looks for agreement. Agreement can be fear. Agreement can be ignorance. Agreement can be silence. Silence is powerful in the wrong direction. When you ignore repeated signs, You unintentionally communicate tolerance, not invitation, tolerance. And tolerance is enough for escalation. This is where witches exploit believers. We knew many Christians prayed loudly in public spaces but neglected spiritual enforcement inside their own homes. They assumed safety instead of establishing it. So assignments focused on domestic space, bedrooms, living rooms, corners, places of rest, places of vulnerability. Dogs reacted because they sensed what humans spiritualized away. I remember one assignment where a home was heavily prayed over verbally, but no authority was exercised territorially. The family prayed, but they did not command. They hoped, but they did not enforce. The dog barked nightly for weeks. We never entered fully. We didn't need to. Oppression entered gradually. Sleep disruption, arguments, anxiety without cause. That was considered a successful operation. This is why I am urgent with you. Because many believers think warfare only looks like possession. They do not recognize pressure. Pressure is the first phase. Nighttime pressure is designed to exhaust your spiritual stamina, to make prayer feel heavy, to make faith feel distant. Your dog reacts because animals are not mentally negotiated out of obedience to instinct. They respond to threat. Now hear this carefully. The enemy fears one thing more than prayer: awareness. When a believer becomes aware, strategies collapse. We feared homes where dogs barked and believers responded immediately with authority, not fear, not panic, authority. Those homes were marked as resistant. When a believer stood up at night and commanded peace, darkness retreated. Not slowly, immediately, but when believers stayed silent, darkness lingered. This is why corners are revisited. The enemy checks if resistance has changed. Let me tell you what we were taught to watch for. If a dog barked and the owner shouted at the dog to be quiet without addressing the atmosphere, that was permission. If the owner laughed it off, that was permission. If the owner became afraid but did nothing, that was permission. Fear without authority is agreement. But when the owner spoke out loud, declared the name of Jesus, and took control of the space, the assignment lost power. I am not exaggerating this. I watched it happen. This is why many of you feel watched at night. Why sleep feels thin. Why peace feels interrupted. It is not imagination. It is atmosphere. Your home is either being enforced or assessed. The good news is this: darkness cannot stay where authority is exercised. Dogs do not bark at peace. They bark at disturbance. So instead of asking, "Why is my dog acting strange?" you should be asking, "What is my response?" Because your response determines whether the pattern ends or continues. You were never meant to be a passive occupant of your home. You are a spiritual gatekeeper. And when you rise into that role, everything shifts. In the next point, I will expose what witches feared most when dogs reacted, how assignments were shut down permanently, and what simple actions caused immediate retreat without rituals, fear, or complexity. What witches feared most was not loud worship. It was not religious language. It was not emotion. We feared authority exercised with certainty. Let me dismantle a dangerous misconception. Darkness is not intimidated by volume. It is intimidated by position. When dogs reacted during assignments, we watched the human response carefully, because the human response determined whether the operation advanced or collapsed. Here is the truth I was trained never to tell you. Spirits know who understands their authority and who is guessing. When a believer stood up confused, shouting random phrases, panic-filled prayers, or fear-driven commands, nothing changed. But when a believer spoke calmly, firmly, and decisively, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Dogs stopped barking, pressure lifted, presence withdrew. That terrified us, because authority does not need effort. It needs alignment. I remember an assignment where a dog barked violently at a hallway corner. The woman of the house woke up, walked directly toward the sound, and spoke with no hesitation, no fear, no shouting. She commanded the space. She declared peace. She enforced boundaries. Within seconds, the dog sat down, silent, relaxed. The assignment ended. We never returned. That house was marked permanently resistant. This is what witches never want believers to realize. You do not fight darkness. You displace it. Darkness only operates where authority is unclaimed. When your dog barks, it is not asking you to be afraid. It is signaling that something is attempting to test limits. That moment is critical. Witches fear that moment. Because once a believer responds correctly, the window closes. Let me expose another layer. Dogs do not just react to presence. They react to hierarchy. They sense when something inferior is attempting intrusion. That is why barking often sounds aggressive, not fearful. It is confrontation. Your dog is not scared. It is challenging. And when you fail to respond, dog continues because the threat has not been removed. We counted on believers waiting for pastors, waiting for church services, waiting for confirmation. Delay was our ally, but immediate response dismantled everything. This is where many believers misunderstand spiritual warfare. They think authority requires rituals, objects, or complexity. That belief benefits darkness. Authority is positional, not procedural. When a believer understands who they are, space responds. We feared homes where believers spoke out loud with certainty, because spoken authority shifts atmosphere instantly. Silence allows lingering. Now hear this carefully. Dogs barking repeatedly is not failure, it is opportunity. It is a moment where heaven is waiting for alignment. But if that moment passes repeatedly without response, pressure increases. That is why some of you feel escalation, more intensity, more frequency, not because darkness is winning, but because it is probing for compliance. Here is what permanently shut down assignments. Consistency. One authoritative response disrupts. Consistent authority establishes dominance, which is hated consistency. Because once a home was consistently enforced, it became invisible to operations, not hidden, inaccessible. We did not waste resources on fortified territory. This is why some of you notice the barking suddenly stop after you finally respond. That is not coincidence. That is retreat. Darkness does not announce defeat. It withdraws quietly. Another truth you must hear. Dogs respond to peace faster than humans do. They are immediate indicators of atmospheric change. When authority is exercised, animals calm down first. Humans often take longer because fear lingers mentally. That is why you must trust the shift even if your emotions lag. Faith is not a feeling. It is enforcement. I am exposing this because many believers unknowingly tolerate pressure by spiritualizing passivity. Passivity is not humility. It is abdication. Your home is not neutral territory. It is either governed or contested. Witches feared believers who understood territorial authority. Because territory once claimed cannot be reclaimed easily. Let me say this clearly. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to be special. You need to be aware and decisive. Dogs barking is not a curse. It is early detection. But detection without response is incomplete. I regret every assignment I participated in, because now I see how easily they could have been shut down. Not with fear, not with rituals, but with authority exercised immediately. In the next point, I will expose why some dogs bark once and stop, why others bark for months, and what determines whether an assignment ends permanently or returns in cycles. Now I need you to understand why some dogs bark once and never again, while others bark night after night for months. This is not randomness. It is response dependent. Assignments do not end because time passes. They end because authority is enforced. When a dog barks once and stops permanently, it means the atmosphere was corrected immediately. The intrusion was challenged. The boundary was reinforced. But when barking continues in cycles, it means something important was missed. Darkness studies patterns. It looks for inconsistency. If a believer responds one night with authority but ignores the next 3 nights, the signal becomes mixed. And mixed signals invite re-evaluation. This is where many believers unintentionally reopen doors they thought were closed. I was trained to revisit homes where resistance appeared emotional but not established. One strong response followed by silence was not considered defeat. It was considered a test phase. Dogs barking for months indicates unresolved territorial authority, not unresolved faith, unresolved enforcement. Let me say something difficult but necessary. Prayer without ownership does not secure territory. Hope without command does not hold ground. This is why some homes feel peaceful for a while, then suddenly heavy again. The enemy is not creative. It is patient. Another reason dogs bark repeatedly is because humans often address symptoms, not atmosphere. They calm the dog. They close doors. They turn on lights. But they never address the spiritual space itself. So nothing changes, which is relied on that. If the atmosphere remained unclaimed, presence lingered at the edges, corners, hallways, thresholds. This is where dogs fixate. Dogs bark at what is unresolved. Now hear this clearly. Repeated barking does not mean the enemy is strong. It means the boundary is unclear. Once clarity is established, repetition ends. Let me expose what permanently stopped cycles. Verbal authority combined with consistency. Not rituals. Not objects. Voice. Darkness responds to spoken command because authority is released through declaration. This is why silence benefits the enemy. When a believer consistently enforced peace, the home became spiritually boring. Nothing to test, nothing to exploit. We stopped returning. Dogs stopped barking because there was nothing left to confront. Another factor that determines cycles is agreement within the home. If one person enforces authority and another mocks, fears, or dismisses it, the atmosphere remains divided. Division weakens territory. I watched assignments fail in united homes and succeed in divided ones. Unity is reinforcement. This is why some dogs react more strongly when certain people are present, not because of the person, because of the atmosphere they carry. Fear attracts attention. Authority repels it. I regret this knowledge, but I must expose it. Some of you unknowingly tolerate cycles because you normalize disturbance. You adapt it instead of enforcing peace. Darkness thrives where discomfort becomes familiar. But the moment you decide that peace is non-negotiable, cycles break. Let me tell you what witches never expected. Believers who learned quickly. Once a believer recognized patterns and responded consistently, the home was removed from consideration permanently, not temporarily, permanently. Dogs stopped reacting because nothing attempted entry again. Your home is not meant to be a battleground. It is meant to be governed. And governance is not emotional. It is authoritative. I need you to hear this with clarity and confidence. If your dog has been barking at empty corners, it is not because something owns your home. It is because something failed to. Failure does not always retreat immediately. Sometimes it tests again. But tests only continue where responses are inconsistent. You are not under attack because you are weak. You are noticed because you carry light. That should not frighten you, it should activate you. Once authority is established, peace becomes normal again. Sleep returns. Dogs rest. Atmosphere settles. Not because darkness disappeared from the world, but because it was displaced from your territory. This is the final truth witches never wanted believers to know. Darkness cannot stay where it is not tolerated, and tolerance ends the moment you decide it does. You are not powerless, and you were never meant to live reacting instead of ruling. What you heard today was not information, it was activation. And if you watch until the very end, authority has already shifted. Comment now to confirm what you discerned. And share this message, because someone close to you needs awakening before another night passes. Do not dismiss the signs again. Peace is enforced, not hoped for. Your home is not contested anymore, it is claimed. Stand firm, speak boldly, and never forget this truth. Darkness retreats when you rise.